there is a wisdom in minimizing your approaches to communication or your platforms and making sure that those platforms align with your goals.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? Because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And we do that through one-on-one coaching or group training for the team. When you listen to this podcast, you will hear insights and advice from communication experts from around the world. My guest today is Craig Mattson. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Craig. 1, he writes, researches, and teaches at Calvin University, where they've had an unusually cold and unusually sunny winter. Well, that's nicer when it's sunny, that's for sure. 2, he's written 3 books, including Digital Overwhelm, which we'll explore today, and he's now working on another book about the goodness of imperfect intergenerational communication in the workplace. And I imagine there's a lot of material around imperfect communication in the workplace. And 3, he has a black Shih Tzu named Chaucer, after the 13th century poet. And like Matt, Chaucer is also an introvert.
Yes.
Craig Mattson, welcome to Your Intended Message.
It's good to be here, George. Thanks for the work you do, and thanks for making space for this conversation.
Delighted to be talking with you today, and I know we're going to address a common issue and a big issue, and that's the concept of digital overwhelm. These days we're flooded with digital messages through the various channels. How can anyone stay sane and productive in this environment? What advice do you have on that?
I think my first piece of advice is to embrace the fact that you are overwhelmed. Be aware of the fact that you are overwhelmed. For me, exhausting conditions happen when, at least in part, when I'm just not noticing that they're going on. And so I have a really quick story. Like you, I do a podcast. And one day I was recording with a guest in the same studio, and I was hearing a buzz in the line, and I was like, where's the buzz coming from? There's nothing happening. It's just a few people talking on mics. And I went to the engineer in our building and said, what do you think's going on? And he's like, where's your smartphone? And I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure. Turned out the smartphone was sitting right next to the little soundboard in our studio, and that the proximity of the phone was creating a buzz on the line. And for me, that became a metaphor of digital overwhelm. There's just a sort of perpetual buzz in our consciousness. Things we should be checking, notifications we wish we were checking, emails that we wish we weren't receiving, and DMs and Slack statuses and just the whole thing. So I think just embracing the fact that it is all way too much is a first step towards coping.
So we don't have to feel that we're not up, that we're a lesser human being because we're overwhelmed.
That's right. Yeah. So, I think embracing that, it's a basic moral fact of human life that if you can be vulnerably present with other people, you're just going to do better. If you pretend like you're a god or goddess of productivity, that's going to be hard on your psyche, and it's probably going to be hard on other people too. So, yeah. So
skip the stoic, I can do this, I can handle it. Just give me more, I can do it. Yes. Because you'll probably just keel over one day because you're just trying too hard.
Yeah.
And so what approach do you recommend to people? Beyond admitting that, heck, I'm overwhelmed, what do I do first?
Well, I think that there's some wisdom in the many books out there right now recommending digital minimalism. I think the term was more or less coined by Cal Newport. And I like this approach. It's sort of shaped by a kind of Buddhist perspective. You'll see it in writers like Oliver Burkeman as well. So I like digital minimalism, but my book actually recommends something else. Because so many other people have talked about that, I was like, yeah, like what other wisdom might there be for our tech swamped workplaces? And so I think you could sum up what I'm recommending as a kind of digital flexibility. So there is a wisdom in minimizing your approaches to communication or your platforms and making sure that those platforms align with your goals. I mean, that's huge, no doubt. But at the same time, sometimes when you do that, when you minimize, you can also get stuck. And you can begin to forget that digital overwhelm is not just your problem. It's our problem. It's a social problem. And so working communities, I think, need something more than digital minimalism. They also need digital flexibility. How's that sound to you, George? That's my supposition.
And I can see where flexibility allows one to have some guidelines, yet be willing to adapt. And it's probably that willingness to adapt instead of saying, I always do it this way.
Right.
And which we tend to think is how we should be, but maybe there's times you can't, it's not a good idea to do it that way. Not all the time.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that my personal example is I'm a language guy. I'm a words guy. And so my love language is long emails, basically when they're written by me. Okay, so maybe not so much when other people write them. But yeah, I think, okay, here's a way for me to get control of an overwhelming situation. I'll write a long email. I'll get us all on the same page. Everybody can refer to it asynchronously. And anytime they forget something, they can always go back and check it again. What could be better? But, you know, like, people don't necessarily read beyond the second line of many emails. And so your 800,000 word email is maybe going to help you feel more calm and more centered, but it won't necessarily help somebody else. And I think attending to other people's digital overwhelm is maybe a good second step for dealing with your own. So that's another of my recommendations.
And so that's something we probably don't think about. We know that we're overwhelmed, but how can we contribute less to the overwhelm of those around us? We think we need to keep sending out messages all the time. Maybe we need to do a check, a second step before, should I send this? And there are times when I've sent emails that I regretted sending them. Although at the time I thought it was the right thing to do, and then later I sent it and said, oh no, how can I take that back? Especially when it's written from a strong emotional state. It could be disappointment, could be anger. It just, I can't believe how stupid you are.
Yeah. But yeah, like attending to the other person's probable state of mind or the likely difficulties that they're facing that you don't even know about. That sort of empathy cultivation is, I mean, it takes time. It takes extra time to like stop and imagine how somebody else might be experiencing digital overwhelm. And you might not feel like you have that time. But yeah, I think you're right. Your instinct is right that if you can take that time, it might actually help you feel a little less flooded too.
And it's funny because in the past couple of days here, myself, I've had a swarm of messages that were creating overwhelm, both on a personal and business level. So they were kind of both happening at the same time. And in one case, I received a message that was from another conversation, but I don't know what happened before that. So at least I was present enough to say, I don't know what happened that led up to this, and I don't know this person's state of mind at this point, so I don't think I should be telling them what to do.
Yeah, that seems wise. Context, please. Context, please.
Yeah, what led up to this? What other principles? So if there's a guideline, if there's something we could do every day when we sit down, before we pick up the phone, before we open the computer, before we go into the virtual meeting, what checklists can we mentally go through?
Let me answer that question in a little bit roundabout fashion. I'm an academic, so roundabout answers are like par for the course. When I interviewed dozens of rising professionals for this book, Digital Overwhelm, I noticed 6 what you might call communicational coping mechanisms. And I've named a couple of them already, but I used sort of nicknames for these styles of communication, or I call them modes of communication. So one might be emailing things. Another might be saying things. Another might be signaling things. Another could be advocating things. Another could be meaning things. And I think the other one was fixing things. And so I explored each of these modes of dealing with digital overwhelm. And I include lots of stories of people using these approaches, and many of them are really, really artful and wise approaches to particular problems. But no one of those modes will do it for the working community that you really want to have and enjoy with your team or your company or your church or your nonprofit. So, yeah, I think my basic guideline is notice the fact that you have a default style. You have a default mode that you turn to again and again, and then get good at seeing what are the gifts of that style, and then what are the ways that that style is burdensome. Maybe for you, inadvertently, maybe for others. So I think learning to just cultivate an awareness of your default style, your default mode, and then also deliberately setting out to complicate your modes, to have more than one mode at hand. So I have a quick story about how that works for me, but I wonder what this is making you think of, George, as I suggest this kind of default style thing.
Well, naturally, I'm thinking, well, what's my default style? And I like to think that most of the time, I don't react to an issue, to a problem. I prefer to get a better understanding, whether it's to look into it more or hear what I think the person is trying to say or not saying. I think I like to take what I might call a thoughtful intellectual approach. And I know that some people don't appreciate that because they want answers now. They want action now. Don't think about it. Just give me an answer. So I know it doesn't resonate with those people. And yeah, so I think that's my default. And I try to remind myself that, okay, George, don't react. Don't overreact. So I'm continually holding myself back. Until one day I do explode.
Yes, I mean, that is a gift to your colleagues, your coworkers, your family members, that you're a reflective person. You try not to be reactive. On the other hand, like, that mode could have its limitations too. I'm sure you could suss those out. So for instance, sometimes a decision needs to be made quite quickly, and your friend or your partner looks at you and is like, what should we do? And your default mode of reflectivity, let me take several days to think this through, won't be, the best gift in that particular moment. So yeah, love your style, George, but it's also got limitations, as you probably experienced, right? I have experienced this myself. Just this weekend, a local bookstore hosted a promotional event, Schuler Books in Grand Rapids. I'm so grateful to them for doing this. They had a book signing table up there. But I realized as I was getting myself up and nerved and geared up for this event that I was more anxious than usual. And I realized that it was because there was no space for me to give a public speech. It was all one-on-one conversations at a book signing table, right? I see you know what I'm getting at, because there's something, this is going to sound weird to people who don't like public speaking, but there's something very reassuringly manageable about a public talk. You're introduced, you go up, you have your 3 points and a story, and people clap and you're done. And it feels, in a way, like a minimalist move that's manageable. But instead, as I was getting ready for this event, I realized, oh my gosh, I have no idea if anyone or who in the world is going to walk through those double doors. And there I'm going to be in a sequence of unpredictable and kind of unmanageable small talk exchanges with strangers. So I talked to my manager about this, who kind of turned into my therapist and said, you know what you need to do? You need a bunch of devices that you can use. And what she meant by that was you need water bottle stickers, you need bookmarks, you need one-page handouts, you need a video that you could send people to online after the fact. And you also need courage to simply chat with people. And so we prepared all these different sort of like possible pathways that people could take towards my book. There was also a stack of books there too. And when people came through the door, I had to sort of look at them in the face and sort of gauge where they were. And if they looked annoyed, I would just piece them out with a water bottle sticker. Have a nice day. If they looked, you know, friendly, then I might say, hey, would you like a bookmark for a book you're about to buy? There's a QR code on that thing, and check out my book talk. And then sometimes people would be open to further conversation. Maybe I would open the book and show them a diagram on page 23 or something. And then sometimes, you know, people really wanted to share their stories. And so we would have an extended exchange. But what my marketer's advice helped me to do was to practice a kind of, I don't know, attentiveness to where other people were, and a flexibility of almost like a decision tree of a whole bunch of possible ways of engaging with people. It still would have been easier for me to give a public speech, but this was a surprising amount of fun. So that's my story about the sort of willingness to switch your modes and what it can make possible with other people.
Excellent example, yes. And so you took the opportunity to adapt, and it sounds like you paid more attention to the people. Yeah. And maybe that's, if people take away one lesson from this discussion, maybe it's pay more attention to where your listener, your reader, where are they at in terms of mindset, and what's their sense of urgency, where do they want to go, and do they even have time for you? So for the ones that you pointed out that looked like they were grumpy or something, you just gave them the water bottle. Here, have the water bottle and get out of my face. I'm not going to bother you.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we just got to do that. We can't win everyone. We can't win everyone to our viewpoint, or even where we can't bring them to where we're at. But if we make an impression, a positive impression, it could be something as simple. That person goes home, hey, great water bottle. Hey, I wonder, what's it all about? Oh, maybe I should look this thing up. That guy looked friendly, even though I was ugly looking.
I was in a hurry. Sure. Yeah, I love that. I kind of wish I had thought to put it that way. I think just that's a simple guideline in the midst of our overwhelming modern conditions, our tech-swamped lives, is just like expend a bit more energy to pay attention to where the other person is. And you might end up having a better time.
And this might sound like a contradiction, but even though I make decisions slowly, there are times when I'm impatient, especially when I'm reading. And so in this case, especially an email or an article, I'll read the first couple lines, and I want to know where it's going and why I should read any further. And if I don't get that in the first couple lines, I don't read the rest. Now, somebody might say, well, it was in my email. Yeah, but you filled it with junk at the beginning.
Yeah, line 637 of your email.
And people might think, yeah, but I put it all there. I did all the work. Well, yeah, but maybe you should have put it up front in the first paragraph so I could find it. And like you, I'm also critical of words. So I'm looking, and I notice trigger words that create a reaction, or words that seem to imply that they're talking down to me or that they're insulting me. And I could be wrong, but it sure looks that way. And especially when we do things quickly, we don't always think about how we're putting it together.
Yeah.
And how do you stay out of that trouble? How do you keep yourself from getting into the doghouse with people?
I want to be really careful to say that most of the time I don't. Like I do mess up a lot. And I think it's important to recognize how much money is being spent, how complicated the platforms are being developed to harvest and monetize our attention and really our distractedness. And so, it's hard to do this, but be patient with yourself. It's an unfair fight that you're in with big tech corporations. They're just a lot better at it than any one person can be. And so, I try to remind myself of that. Like I just wasted that time. I should not have been scrolling there. Or I just spent a lot of time designing a communication for a class that I'm teaching that didn't work. So, I don't feel like a super competent person in this. But I think one thing that I've recently read, it's a writer named Elizabeth Oldfield, and she has a piece of advice that I think she picked up from somebody else as well in her book, Fully Alive. She talks about just asking people if you could start over. And I think when you're in a conversation that's going south, or you're in an email exchange that's not working somehow, or obviously when there are 350 texts going back and forth, it might be good to just say, could we start this again? Could we do this over? And then, let the frustration and the irk and the annoyance or maybe the boredom, let that seep out of the exchange and do a do-over. So that's something I'm not doing yet, but I would like to do more often. If just asking people, could we start this again? I think we got off on the wrong foot.
And that's simple advice, but that could be powerful. Could we start? This isn't going right. Could we start this again? And I imagine that if it's not going right, we probably can't start it again right now. We might need to let a day go by so that all of us can decompress, let off the pressure and say, yes, let's start fresh. Because if we try to start right now, we're still in the fight mode.
Yep. Right.
And you said something curious. Now, you teach communication, you study it, you write about it, and you teach it. And you pointed out that you felt you weren't good at it. And my question is, do you think that you feel that way simply because you're more aware?
That could be. That's a very generous read, I think. It could be that the fact that you are aware of the ineffectiveness of a communication simply comes from the fact that you're just paying a little bit closer attention than maybe the average person is. Like maybe a lot of us, I think this is just how human life goes. A lot of us have a sort of good enough approach to communication. Like I got the message through somehow. And your whole podcast is predicated on there's probably a better way to get your intended message through. So I think, George, that I appreciate that as like a compassionate reading of my sometimes felt sense of ineffectiveness. It might come from, just like trying to actually pay attention. How is this actually working? Not super well. Could we do this better somehow?
and maybe the corollary to that is for people who believe that they are great communicators, maybe they're not. Maybe you're not. Maybe you think you're great because you don't see the mistakes or don't acknowledge them. And maybe you could be better if you paid attention, if you became aware of at least some of the mistakes. Maybe not all of them, but some of the mistakes. What might you do again? And do you recommend that people debrief themselves after a series of communication?
I think that debriefing is something that could happen in different modes too. I think debriefing is essential. Sometimes it's intrapersonally. You just sit there at your desk and you think, what just happened? A lot of my research subjects, the participants who I interviewed, talked about kind of baffling exchanges they would have with managers or with team members. And that requires a lot of debriefing. And some of that might be intrapersonally within your own head. I try to journal every morning about the conversations of the day before. And if I'm really, journaling effectively, it might be more than just remembering what happened the day before, which sometimes that's all I can manage. But sometimes it can be like, what was desolating about that conversation? What was so discouraging about that? Or why did I get angry there? I don't know. Let me think that through. So yeah, I do like debriefing. For me, one of my favorite modes of debriefing is dialogue, talking to a trusted coworker and saying, would you walk me back from the edge here? I think I'm about to jump off into outrage and maybe not the best path forward here. So yeah.
And that's an interesting approach, journaling about your communication that you have on a regular basis, because that causes you to reflect. And so if there are people, if listeners want to improve their communication and while decreasing the pressure of digital overload, what would you recommend that they do on a regular basis?
Yeah, let me think that through. Because we've named several kind of guidelines. One is like being aware of your default. I think that's important. Acknowledging your digitwhelm and that it's a shared condition. That's another important point. And cultivating flexibility among different modes. That was a third or fourth thing that we said. So I think that one of my favorite sort of tactics that came to mind as I was doing this research and writing about digital overwhelm is to try to hear one mode in the style of another mode. So, quick example. When I write an email, I want to try to pay attention to how it sounds. It is a visual medium, but I want my email communication to be in a Craig voice, if possible. And my voice has a particular timbre, I have sort of habits of speaking loudly or quietly. I have different pitches. I have a vocal quality that people could recognize my laugh if they know me, way down the hall. They would know, oh, that's Craig, he's laughing again. And then also a cadence, like I have rhythms in my speech. And so one of my challenges as just a digital communicator is maybe switching what is Walter Ong, he called this the sensorium. That is a certain sense that comes to the fore in a particular time in history. So like we've been in an era of the image. So like the visual is super important to us today. But maybe to try to hear a kind of medium of communication that really privileges one sense, the eye, but instead hear it. Or maybe it's a medium that is really good for scrolling and you try to imagine what is it like if it's at a standstill. So another way that people do this sort of thing, I've heard that a number of Gen Z people use voice recordings to talk to each other. They sort of send each other audio postcards. And some of us older professionals will also use voice memo for, capturing a good idea as we're driving down the road. So I think that sort of hearing a mode in another mode's style and kind of checking it is a good way to stay human in digital spaces. So if you normally write it, try saying it. If you normally say it, try videoing it. If you normally see it on video, like imagine it handwritten or something like that. I think those sort of switchabilities can help you to stay human.
And when we switch those modes, we're more likely to notice the nuances?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Because each mode has its own limitations, right? It has blind spots. And, kind of checking one mode with another one can help you to, sort of catch some of those tone deafnesses that creep in.
For those who'd like to know more about your book, Digital Overwhelm, they can find a link in the description below. If they'd like to learn more about your podcast and newsletter, they can find that as well. It's themodeswitch.com. You can find those links below. Craig, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could sit down with a business leader who is hearing complaints from their team about the digital overwhelm, what advice would you give to that leader to help their team cope and be more effective?
Again, I think the movement between digital minimalism and digital flexibility is one that a leader is going to want to make all the time. Like, I think there's something really practical about saying, yeah, you're right. We have too many platforms in this company. We need to get rid of some of them. We're subscribing to all these things and we're not able to keep track of each other. So let's minimize. But then I think also some of the advice of flexibility that you and I have been focusing on in this conversation is also important. But here's like one sort of overarching advice that I would offer a business leader. And that is, as often as you can't do this all the time. Nobody can. But as often as you can, receive communication from your team as gift. It's maybe not a gift you wanted. It's maybe not the gift you asked for. It's not on your list for the day. But if you can see it as gift, then I think you can move into the wonderful kind of relationship that gifts make possible. So it might be a criticism. It might be a complaint. It might be somebody just expressing just outright indignation against you. But if you can have the presence of mind and the intactness of soul to say, somehow, this is a gift to me, I've got to figure out how, I think that can open up some possibilities that are really life-giving in your company.
That's valuable advice. My guest today is Craig Mattson, reminding you to be vulnerably present. If you like what you heard, tell your friends. And post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.